Welcome to the Roniel and Duran podcast show. I'm Duran.
And I'm Roniel.
So, for those of you who don't follow my illustrious colleague, Mr. Roniel, was, I don't know, featured isn't the right word, quoted, actually oft quoted, within an article by Newsstack. They were discussing our internet service providers, ISPs, better bets to offering that cloud computing for the edge. And when we talk about edge computing, what we're talking about is the computing as close to the customer, whomsoever is going to consume that data, as possible. And there are a variety of reasons why people are discussing it. And most of it's based on alleged claims of latency and tolerance and things of that nature. But Roniel got to talk about it from a security perspective, among other things. If you haven't seen it, we do have a link down below in the description. Feel free to take a peek, and don't forget to comment and tell Roniel how crazy he is.
Oh yeah, I'm very crazy. I think I'm too crazy. And then we know all the complex and issues with ISPs, especially when they're talking about the new edge technology and stuff that they're trying to do in those devices, which now is like what I guess considered an IoT system or device. So happen to have the chance to discuss what I feel some of the issues would be having those, devices. Now they're utilizing those devices in these different companies. These different companies are utilizing those devices, and then things being stored on those devices. So that brings a new attack surface for attackers to be able to get the data or sensitive data that may be on that device, depending on how they're doing that. So you'll see that across the board where I've had the chance to work with different clients before in the past that have different creative devices that store data on in these devices. And the biggest goal is to try to see how you can get the data out the device to change different content. So that is usually the challenge, and it's going to be a challenge for the ISP if they're going that route, since that's the route we're going.
I definitely agree. I think really one of the most important things to talk about when we discuss, there are a couple of different, issues at hand. So there is this claim that latency can't be tolerated and all of this other stuff, which to me makes a lot of bold assumptions. Yeah. And most of those I don't think are accurate. So first and foremost, that there is a latency issue right now. And I don't think that's accurate, especially not for the vast majority of the industrialized world. Already everything is, you have massive pipes from Amazon all across Europe, all across the United States, and across much of Asia, spanning out of Korea, Tokyo, and of course China as some of the major hubs there. And we have similar stuff across many of the different providers. I don't know that latency is the issue that people are trying to currently make it when they talk about the subject of pushing the edge closer to the consumers.
Yeah, I don't think this is the issue. To me, it just seems like they're trying to re-innovate, and you know how it is when you try to re-innovate, you create new opportunities for attackers. And I think the way we're doing it, if it isn't broken, don't fix it. So I don't see the point. I don't see any issues, but now they're creating more issues, if you ask me. By bringing it, by bringing it closer to the client, you're creating more issues. And then you don't even know what that client, what they may do with that. So you're pretty much opening up more attack surface areas for your clients or even for the ISP.
Well, and you're exactly right. So this puts, already ISPs are at great risk. We've seen them targeted numerous times. We've seen major attacks, largely distributed denial of service, ransomware, things of that nature, attempting to shut down some of these ISPs across the big ISPs in both France and on the eastern seaboard of the United States. They've had huge ramifications. Pushing this out, to me, first of all, seems premature, but it also seems like it would be a compliance nightmare. So one of the benefits of Yeah, you're laughing because you know it's true.
Yep.
And we look at something like Amazon or any of the cloud based hosting providers, and compliance is already a huge nightmare. We see all of these organizations that have been pushing towards SaaS solutions. So you, of course, have Microsoft, you have Highland, you have PeopleSoft, and Intuit, et cetera, et cetera. And when we look at this, the question constantly becomes, what can we do to ensure compliance? We just got through what should have been a big lesson for a lot of people about supply chain and supply chain security with the compromises of Microsoft, the compromises of SolarWinds, and so on and so forth. Why do we have to keep rehashing the same thing? These ISPs, they won't maintain compliance. There are too many rules, too many regulations, and quite frankly, they're insecure as is. What happened to all of these people complaining that the ISPs were going to charge Netflix extra and charge you extra if you were using Netflix, and that big push to force the FCC to maintain that net neutrality? It seems like that has gone completely by the wayside as part of this discussion. If we can't trust them with just transporting data to consumers, how could we trust them with holding our data, even if it is as a cache or a shadow copy?
Yeah, no, that is a totally bad idea, especially if you don't trust ISP to your service provider now. So, I mean, that is not a great idea. And even if it's cash, you can only imagine what they're going to do with that data.
Right.
And how much money they can make off of that data.
Right.
Now, even just now, what you're concerned with what they're doing with the data, but now you're saying that, hey, we're going to give you this device and we're going to, you're going to store that data. Come on now. And then not even then, let's think about what the attackers are going to do with that data. Like, you're spoon feeding them now. You're giving them exactly what they need. I'm not saying it's not easy to probably attack a service provider now, but you're kind of making it even more easier for attackers to do whatever type of attacks they want or try. Like, especially when we're talking about in that article, route injection attacks and all type of stuff.
Right. You've got a lot of poisoning attacks that can go on and so on and so forth. I think it also sweetens that honey.
Yeah.
If I'm going after I'm not actually a big fan of storing a lot of data within the cloud. I don't think most of it makes sense. And I know from personal experience, I should say from professional experience, I know that the more we concentrate our data, the juicier that target is going to be. And some people would say, okay, well, this does the exact opposite because now we're spreading the data out. But there is such a thing as distributing the data such that now it's just as juicy as if you had super concentrated it, because it's so much easier to get to, so much easier to compromise, so much easier to brutalize. And like you say, I mean, the cache poisoning, any route poisoning is ridiculously simple. I can inject stuff into someone's cache. But what if they start holding my data for ransom, they being the actual ISP? Everyone talks about ransomware, and yes, it's important, but companies hold people's data for ransom all the time. All the time. Hospitals used to do this. I don't know if you ever had to deal with this, but because of the military, I've had to move to many different hospitals. And way back when, they would actually charge you for your own records.
Yeah.
And
I dealt with that a while back.
Yes, and they would not want to release the records either. And it wasn't until an act of Congress back in, I think it was the 1990s, that started to change. And they still, for a while there, were trying to charge you for copies of your own records. It's like, I don't want a copy. I want the original. You don't need it. I'm not going with you anymore. We're moving, or PCSing is the term they use. But, we're doing whatever. You don't need that data. And a lot of hospitals, a lot of doctors' offices would get real snippy. Well, ISPs are going to do the same exact thing. We already see that, though, to some degree within some of the current hosting providers. If I sit there and I host through a SaaS solution, there is no guarantee that I'm going to be able to export my data out of it in a meaningful way to then use some other service. You marry yourself not only to the software, but you're marrying yourself to the organization so tightly that it's very easy for them to hold your stuff hostage. And what are you going to do? Especially if they say it's too hard and they decide to quit right then and there. No notice. And they can do that. That's in most terms and conditions. They say, well, either side can just, at a moment's notice, decide to nullify it. But usually they say, but you have to give us 90 days. But they don't get 90 days. And even if they had to give you 90 days, what is that going to do for you? Are you really going to, within 90 days, be able to figure out how to exploit all of your corporate data and then import it into some alternative solution? The answer is probably no.
No, it's not going to be possible. So yeah, you're right. That's another issue that I don't think people are thinking about. Like all of the similar issues that we had before is going to be prominent now, but even worse. And to me, they'll have more control over you.
Right.
And I don't think people understand that. So some of the things they're worried about before, you need to worry about now even more.
Right. But
then, like I said, not only the ISP, it's also the attackers. It just, to me, brings it more attacks, different things, like even sniffing. Like the device is there and easier for me to sniff, especially if they're using, I don't know which type of edge technology, but I had a chance to mess with some of the edge devices, and they're literally just microcontrollers, and you can literally swap in, swap out, and put whatever you want in that device or reprogram. So like, to me, I'm looking at all of the different hardware attacks you can do from a penetration test side or even from an attacker side. It's just, I'm looking for both ways. There's big problems here, and I don't think it's a great idea.
And it also depends vastly on the implementation. And let's take Midwestern United States as an easy example. Most cities have contracts where only certain internet service providers can operate within that city. And usually it's either a monopoly or a duopoly. I don't know why this is. To me, that's wrong, but it's a state sanctioned, meaning government sanctioned monopoly or duopoly. And it's actually, well, anyway, it's fascist technically, but because they're getting kickbacks from it.
Right.
But so what winds up happening is, let's say that I go through and I pay Comcast to provide edge support, that edge-based localization. Well, if Comcast isn't in your town, do I have to pay, let's say it's, I don't know, Spectrum? Do I have to pay Spectrum too? Yeah, I know, they're terrible. Do I have to pay Spectrum too? Or are you just going to get whatever Comcast gives you, which goes back to the net neutrality question and how long that's going to last here in the United States? And all this spirals, it doesn't make any sense to me, because now I'm paying a whole bunch of different internet service providers in order to try to speed up your access, when the truth is, if I suck it all back down and either I host it or I pay Google, Amazon, Microsoft, or whatever cloud service I want to host it, how much slower is that going to be? And what is the real payback here for me, the provider of the data, and you, the consumer of the data? I'm honestly, I don't see it. I think they're trying to solve a problem that doesn't exist anymore. We're not all... This isn't the early 1990s. I'm sure you remember, so slow to do everything in the 80s and 90s as far as the internet was concerned. It was terrible.
Yeah, it was dial up.
Yeah.
Oh, God.
Yes. And we don't have that problem anymore. Now, most connectivity, you're talking within 250 milliseconds is a long time. And that's something that you don't see very frequently. So I don't understand what it is they're trying to do. All I see are a lot of red flags from a security perspective, from a corporate perspective, and just from a consumer perspective. I mean, shoot, if they move to this kind of model, what is going to stop the ISP from purposefully wounding traffic from those who aren't using them, or those who are using some competitor, whomever that might be? I don't understand where this was going. I don't understand what anyone was thinking. And I certainly don't understand why your article was not properly edited.
But you know, you made a suggestion there. I didn't think about this also. The fact that not only do they have control of what you can see. I mean, like they can, if they don't want you looking at their competitors, they can stop you from doing it. They can stop you from doing whatever. But here's another thing: do you really just say that it's not really to try to solve a problem? What if it's more about solving a problem for them, meaning that they want to be able to get more control?
Yeah,
more money, more cash, more control.
Yeah.
And like having that device close to the client gives them more visibility to me, more control over that individual, that company or whatever, and more money. So I mean, it's just getting closer. Forget getting closer to the client, getting closer to your data.
Yes, it is, because you're going to have to give them special access, and quite frankly, I don't think they deserve it. Their systems are not secure as is. I could plug in right now to the other side of my modem if I wanted to, and pull all the data from my entire neighborhood and everyone else connected to the same switch that I'm on. And we could do this pretty much anywhere in the world. You go to pretty much any location in the world, you connect up to it's called point of contact, POC. That's where your internet service provider gives you what's called a drop. So they give you whatever it is in order to connect. So it can be a coaxial cable, it can be an RJ45, which of course is Ethernet, so on and so forth. So I can take whatever that is, connect it up to my system, and more likely than not, unless you're doing something like DSL where it's a dedicated line, I can see what everyone else is doing. If they can't secure the one thing that is literally their job, why would I trust them with anything else? It doesn't make any sense to me.
Yeah, it doesn't. But hey, that's the way we're moving, and I don't think people look at the security aspect of it. And that's what the article was supposed to bring out, some of the security issues with it. Though just giving more insight here, since there wasn't a lot of insight in there on what some of the ramifications would be if we go this route. Now, my question to you is, do you think that the customers will have a choice on whether they want to have the device closer to them or stick with what we already have?
If the ISPs have their way with it, no. They are, by the way, I cannot overstate this. They're completely, utterly, totally untrustworthy. You really cannot trust them at all. What they would do is they would wound everyone's traffic if they could. And that's the whole reason why we have to actually legislate that they can't. And the second you start moving to this, that would allow them the wiggle room to get around that legislation. And you know what? I could easily see them going through and saying, oh, well, you didn't purchase it, so that's why it's slower. Or, oh, well, you only purchased 10 gigs worth, and people have requested 12 gigs worth in this area. So either one, we're going to wound their request over to you or wound their request over to us. Because that's the other part of this, is there's this lie that, oh, well, we need more computing power, so we're going to distribute it. That's the second end of this. There are people saying it's latency based, and then there are people saying, well, computation based. But the truth is, what they would be more likely than not using is a cache version, because they have to. Either they're going to have to cache your data source, be that database and file systems or what have you, or they're going to have to cache the actual system as a whole. But what that means in either case is they're not crunching any data. You're still crunching the data.
It sounds like a P2P.
Oh, yeah, definitely. The whole thing is really honestly just a giant money-making scheme, and I guarantee they would soak it for all it's worth if it ever does take off. I would strongly recommend organizations resist it, and that no one move toward it. Could you imagine going through and trying to pay all of the different internet service providers to ensure that your data gets distributed in a localized fashion like this? And what happens if someone's using an out-of-date cache for whatever reason, and you're maybe a storefront, and something gets sold at a price that it no longer is valid, or alternatively, someone hacks one of these instances, changes the price on one of the instances, and then makes a big purchase through there. I mean, good luck trying to track it down. You're going to never be able to figure out how the hell they did it.
I think not only with the caching, you have low balancing too, which will be the issue with smuggling.
Oh, definitely.
Attacks. They're going to have a lot of different. There's going to be a lot of issues here, and caching is not the right way to do this either way, but that's the only way they can do it. And the question is, they're going to rely on you to update your cache, or they're going to update your cache?
Yeah.
More likely, I see you happen to be the one, the client happen to be the one to make sure their cache is up to date.
Mm-hmm. Synchronization is going to be a beast.
Yeah. And that's where I see, like I said, there's going to be some desynchronization attacks going on because of those issues. So, and it's going to be all on you, not on the ISP, the service provider. They're going to come back and say, well, this is your job to do this. We just provide the capabilities, but it's your job to do that, not ours.
Right.
So you now have to take ownership of all of this stuff, and they're pushing that to you, but they're also going to say, hey, well, if you want more of, like you said, more gigabytes or more data and more, this, and you need to pay more money. Now they can control how much more money they get. Now, now we're stuck into that realm like we have with our phones. So, it's totally, it's a disaster in the making. So
I don't think
agree.
It's
a good idea.
I completely agree.
I want to throw a monkey wrench in here, because now that we're talking about this, what about Elon Musk when he's talking about doing the Wi-Fi thing from the satellites? Like, that's even worse too. I mean, now he's also controlled. They're going to control your data, and you're talking about having Wi-Fi around, like you can go anywhere around the world. It's there. It sounds awesome and amazing, but it sounds like a disaster too. Like, it kind of translates together to me. Like, I just think, it's a total freaking disaster.
It is. It is. There are a lot of problems with that. I really don't understand why we would push in that direction. So, first and foremost, satellite communication, or I should say communication from satellites to the Earth, uplink and downlink is what it's called, is very slow relative to everything else that we have currently going on today. Incredibly slow. So if you're sitting there doing all that Wi-Fi communication up with satellites, even as it moves from satellite to satellite, the second it has to come back to Earth, you're going to incur that latency, but you incur it twice. You incur getting it up there and then getting it back down. And so from that perspective, it really doesn't make any sense, because if you want to talk about edge computing and speed, well, maybe that's why you would need this, is because all these people start moving to satellite communication. As someone who has worked extensively in that field, I can tell you, you don't want to do anything with satellites and communication with or through satellites unless you have to, because it's slow. It's laggy. It is harmed by simple things like clouds or too much humidity in the air. So why would you do this? And wireless operates in the same way. So one of the biggest hindrances to 5G has long been weather. And that's why when we look at the bands that they're using, the frequencies that they're using what they are. And the problem, though, is your big speeds only come if you're close to the tower. And then what speed you get varies widely from day to day based on the humidity, based on birds or flocks of insects. I say flocks of insects. I don't know. Hordes? I don't even know what.
Yeah, I would say, yeah, hordes of insects, flocks. Oh, man, that's a good one.
Flocks. Yeah,
But-
all of that stuff. Why
So you
would you
don't really,
do it?
so you don't really get the true, like, and I noticed this with my phone now having 5G, it sucks. And it literally has to downgrade so many times. It'll downgrade to the LTE and then it'll downgrade to 3G. Man, 3G, like what I thought 3G was back then, it was amazing. And then I think now, like, it's slow as shit. And I'm like, and we don't even want to go how to go further down. So I see a big problem with 5G as well. Like, I thought it was going to be great, but it didn't turn out to be better than 4G.
No. In fact, if you aren't extraordinarily close to the antenna, it basically resorts down to 4G, and then it can buffer down as needed, even lower and lower and lower bandwidth wise as you move further and further away. That's why we have, instead what they try to do to mitigate some of that is what they call beam forming and all of that good stuff. And I was doing a big project on this a little bit ago where we were actually using 5G in an R&D fashion. And one of the things I'll tell you that's also important to this discussion is, so I've worked on multiple, as we've discussed before, multiple weapons platforms, weapons systems, and then of course spacecraft and telecommunications, deep space communications, things of that nature. And I've done a lot of R&D stuff tied to that. And something a lot of people don't recognize is those wireless is actually considered a major carcinogen, meaning it causes cancer. And they know this for a fact. Now, electricity in and of itself does as well, but not near to the extent as wireless. And actually, in order to work on a lot of the R&D projects that I have and do work on, I actually have to sign and had to sign waivers stating that I understood that there was an extraordinarily high risk of cancer, and I was putting myself at risk of cancer, and I wouldn't sue the government. That was literally a major part of just trying to be hired to do all this work. That's funny because some of the stuff we were doing was just cell phone antennas, basically. And even those are now, everyone who walks through airports now, in the United States at least, they have those body scanners, and they use cell phone signals. And I sit there and I'm like, yeah, I really don't want to go through there because I already know that they cause cancer because the projects I worked on that we had to sign something saying that we understood that those caused cancer. I don't want to go through those. I work with enough of this stuff. I put myself at big enough risk. I already have tumors all over my body. I don't need more cancer, thank you. And it's if we were sitting there bombarding, the more we bombard the Earth in general with wireless radio, the more we're going to see problems, medical issues that come from this. And there are a lot of people who have issues with this. I don't know about you, but if, for example, I'm in a room that's quiet with even the lights turned off and everything turned off, I can actually hear the electricity buzzing through the walls. And that's in every building I've ever been in. I can hear the electricity. And that's, it's shielded and all of this other stuff. But I think people would do well to recognize that you don't want to bathe in this all of the time. You really don't. If we start putting this, satellites are now just bombarding us 100%. It's bad enough that we have cell phone towers doing that all over the place. to get it from the satellites too, you can read a lot of articles on the health effects of this stuff. You don't want to do that.
So basically, it's a cancerous culture.
Yeah,
that's right. Just what it is. It's cancer everywhere. It's cancer in the food that they process now. You're talking about all of the radiations and signals and stuff like that. You got this, depending on how much you're in the sun and depending on how hot you get, it's been getting hot. Like global warming has been a big issue lately.
Right.
And the way things in the climate is changing. So you just might as well say that, the world is a cancerous culture. Yeah. And we're just making it worse. We're if you think about Terminator, how, inventing the Skynet and robots are going to take over the world. Well, just say we haven't got there yet. But at least right now, if you think about all the technology and how bad it's consuming us and it's killing us.
Yeah.
Just has that, you might as well call this a modern day Skynet, just without the robots actually taking over the world.
Right.
We're not there yet, but
we're that's where there.
I'm getting. Yeah. Oh gosh. I don't know what's worse, zombies, Skynet. I mean, can we keep going with vampires?
Yeah. I got the teeth for it.
I know, right? Werewolves.
That's right.
I think I'm letting my hair grow out.
That's right. I've seen them.
You seen them at Highland, didn't you?
Yes.
Every so often, you have a video communication or Zoom, and you see the werewolf come out of the blue. But that didn't come from me. Oh man, that is a good one. But yeah, definitely. I think that the way everybody's trying to reinvent the way we do things or make it better, so-called, but they're, like I said, they're just making it worse. They're not making it better. And as I said before, if it's not broke, don't fix it. Like, leave it the way it is. Like, for instance, with phones, how smaller can the phones get? Like,
we can't use them already. They're too small.
Yeah, like, and I like my phones a lot bigger than the smaller phones, but again, like they're trying to make things so small and so, fits in your pocket, it fits anywhere, and I'm just like, how small are we gonna get?
Right. People with these fingers can't use current phones.
No, stop it. The flexing technology, bending the phone, like that is crap. That thing breaks. Like just stop.
You broke it already?
Well, that was somebody was. I'm not going to say anything about it, but where I was seeing the phone, and I don't have the flip phone, but I've seen somebody break it. So
that doesn't shock me.
It's not good. I mean, yeah, of course. I would love to go back to the way phones were. This iPhone stuff, it's great. It was amazing and all that at the time, I guess, but it's like every phone looks the same.
Yeah.
I'd like to go back to the way phones were, where it was kind of like different. Like, what about the flip ones? And it's just something cool, even though they still broke. Like, I don't know if you ever had a Blackberry, but I hated that phone. I used to get it because every business person had it, and that little ball would break every time. And I used to have to try to put it back and, try to tape it together to keep it. They were expensive, and that little ball would keep falling out, and I have to chase the ball down when I was on the bus, try to chase the ball and get it back and put it back in. I think that was horrible.
So I think one of the other important things that people need to remember, and this goes very much in line with all of this is together, so wireless is easier to compromise than wired, point blank, because the physical access element of it is removed. So when we start talking about any kind of long-range wireless technologies, then you are greatly increasing the likelihood that someone can sniff your traffic and you'll never know, or join your traffic and you'll never know through spoofing and what have you. At least with wired, they had to be able to sever the communication and then tap it in some way. And if you're talking fiber optics, for a little while that was harder. Now a child could do that kind of deal. we're having the same issue. As you push this stuff down and out, then what you do is not only compliance nightmare and general security nightmare, you find yourself in the same issue because the access to a system housing the data is now more widely available. And the amount of protections you have to put in front of it is N large. So if you have N systems out there, because N systems are all publicly available, you have to have and firewalls and what have you, or you risk compromise. But you also have to, of course, still protect the mothership, so to speak. Assuming we're just using the edge as more of a caching, which really is, that's not the only way people are talking about it. They are talking about it from a computational perspective, which is ridiculous. It blows my mind. If you're going to do that, I would rather use a tried and true system like AWS, and I would go with a compliant version of it. I don't understand all of this. All of this makes no sense. It's very haphazard, and it reeks of nobody talked to the security guys or gals, as the case may be, of course.
Because security is not thought about from the beginning.
Yeah.
And that's what I always keep saying. And people you have to think about it from the beginning. Before you even start doing this, you have to get security people involved from the beginning and start doing your threat modeling and start going over your architecture and how you want to design and seeing some of the issues. And in that way, you can step out and see before you put this stuff out to the public or in production that you have covered your bases. Right. So they don't think about that. They're thinking about money.
Right.
Just push it out. We don't care. We don't care what issues with it. We'll deal with it later. Just get it out there.
That's exactly right.
But then it becomes a security people's problem that, why didn't you guys do this? Well, why didn't you secure your shit before you actually put it out there? Don't get mad at the security people when you guys put this shit out here without actually securing it from the beginning.
Right.
Get mad. Doesn't make sense.
Well, I'm going to take a second to quote a vice president I dealt with at a certain organization who, when I sat there and was telling them that we had a big problem and all this other stuff and they could get sued, his exact response was, well, I'm sure I can convince a jury to see my way. You're going to deal with that all over the place. All of these organizations, you sit there and you're like, oh, well, that's okay. If I push my data out to Comcast, et cetera, and they get compromised and their data, my data gets stolen as a result of that, I'll be able to sue Comcast. And that's not, well, okay, you can sue them all you want, but you won't win. No one's going to win of it. Your consumers won't win and you won't win. And this is, let me end my bit of this with a very simple story. So I had a client who came to me having been compromised by the Chinese. And I went through, and now her stuff was hosted on a cloud system. And she was paying for what should have been dedicated hosting. I go into the system, I start doing some forensics, and I say, well, first and foremost, the system has been compromised already, and it was compromised by the Russians. Only the difference was, unlike the Chinese who stole the data and trashed the place, the Russians were just sitting there, just spying on it and doing their thing. They were being quiet, which is what the Russians tend to do. The Chinese tend to be like that, bull in a china shop, which is kind of funny if you think about it. But.
Yeah. You sure that wasn't kind of on that end? Yeah.
Maybe I have to contemplate that one in the review. But I was looking at a little more and I went through and I took my image that I could, and then I asked the provider, hey, would you do me a favor? And I'd like an exact copy of the hard drive because I did what I could. And he said, oh, well, there's a problem. I said, what? He said, well, don't tell the individual, but there are multiple customers on here. And I was like, yeah, I actually had already figured that out because they had actually been compromised another time, and that was through another system that was being so. This wasn't the only system on there. Like I said, she paid for dedicated hosting. Well, she wasn't getting dedicated hosting. Dedicated hosting is where I get hardware dedicated to me and no one else gets to touch it. So no one else sits on that system. And what wound up happening was, I guess, for whatever reason, other systems were being hosted out of that. And some of them had been compromised. And when they got compromised, the people broke out of the jail and then broke out of the VM and absconded with the entire thing. I'd already known that. That's why I asked him to give me a full image. And I say all this because one of the things that people forget when they talk about cloud anything, and this is edge computing, this is non-edge computing, this is everything. There's a lot of trust involved. And a lot of times that trust is not warranted. And this goes back to auditing and compliance. And when you audit, you need to actually go in there and physically check and verify, because I guarantee you, having worked with organizations that do this kind of stuff, they will flat out lie to your face and tell you a lot of things that aren't true. In this poor woman's case, her data had been stolen multiple times. It was big breach, huge breach. Lots of people's very sensitive data taken as a direct result of this. And you're going to see the same exact thing if people move to ISP-based edge computing, because I don't have to compromise you. I just have to compromise someone on the same system. That's how the iCloud data gets stolen constantly. That's how a lot of data gets stolen, GoDaddy, etc. This is what happens. And cPanel or whatever you're using will not work. It doesn't work.
Yeah. All in all, this is not a good idea, and if we can refrain from it, that's the better way. I think we should keep it the way it is. It's not great the way it is, but it's better than what we're about to go to.
Right.
In my opinion. So I think that we should not move forward with edge computing, and unless they can figure out those concerns that we described. I can see this actually going to a privacy thing and being in court, because this is a big privacy issue, and there's a lot of factors here. So my thing is, I would vote against this.
Definitely.
So hopefully, if anybody's watching this that is, a part of a corporation thinking about going and moving towards the edge computing, if you're thinking about that, think again. Refrain from it. Hopefully, we don't go this route. But if we do, hopefully that they would take security into consideration, but I doubt that will happen. So
definitely,
that is my opinion, and that's what I'm sticking with.
If you haven't, please check out the article, and we will again include it in the description down below. And I dare all of you to find the unmatched quotation mark.
It's like finding Where's Waldo. Like, I mean, he's not hard to find. What about Carmen Sandiego? Like, yeah.
I enjoyed those games.
Yeah, they were awesome.
I know it was a TV show too, but the games were good.
Yeah. No, it was awesome actually doing that. So yeah, we can see who the first one to find it. And if you find it, please comment where you found it at. But however, I'm Roniel.
I'm Duran.
And we will conclude our segment. And if you haven't already, please subscribe to our channel and stay tuned for other episodes. Thank you.
Have fun.
See you later, alligator.